and now with the war in Iran and all the political uncertainty, it seems like Bitcoin is trading in a way that we didn't really expect it.
I feel like right now you've at least got two major things just disrupting everything at the same time, between sort of the war and then this AI, productivity disruption.
And obviously Bitcoin has been kind of defined as the currency of AI, right? But then we are seeing there are so many AI agents right now, they are actually buying crypto and they're actually buying Bitcoin.
1 billion new software developers coming online overnight. And those are these AI agents, right? And their natural language is code, and they can act independently from humans.
What those agents are going to be doing, if you give the money to them and say go and spend them or go and invest them, are they going to invest in US stock, UK stock, European stock? What are they going to do?
Why would I use a currency that I have no say in? And so I actually think that you'll find they will gravitate toward Bitcoin more and more as time goes on.
It's quite scary if we think about it. Just this week, Alibaba linked AI agent named Rome like the Italian city, yes, went rogue during training, hijacking GPUs to mine cryptocurrency without any human instruction. So you see, AI agents are getting more and more power. AI agents are no longer writing emails, are no longer just doing research for you. They are actually autonomously executing workflows and managing budgets. AI is creating mass software deflation, making software cheap and easy to build. And the only thing that will hold the value is a fixed supply network like Bitcoin. I couldn't think of a better time to get Brandon on the show to talk about, what he thinks about Bitcoin, where he sees things going, the intersection between Bitcoin and AI, which is very interesting. And I really want all my listeners to understand the implication of Bitcoin for AI and vice versa. And also talking about the Bitcoin Vegas, which is the biggest Bitcoin conference happening in Las Vegas within 6-7 weeks. So you definitely need to be there. Go and get your ticket, book your hotel, because that's the place where you are gonna learn what is gonna happen in the next year in the space. So it's really important to be at that event. Don't lose the edge. You are gonna get an edge. You are gonna get more information and knowledge if you come to those events in person. And it's only there, seeing people on the stage, interacting with actually people that are building and investing in this industry. You are going to learn so much, something that an AI agent is really not going to be able to do. You definitely don't want to miss out. If you are interested in Bitcoin, you come to those events where the industry get together. And Bitcoin conferences now are getting bigger and bigger because Bitcoin has become mainstream. So come, get your edge. I will be there. Use our link, get your ticket, book your hotel. Super important. Now, back to my conversation with Brandon. Hey Brandon, how are you?
I'm doing great, Steffi. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for coming on the show. It's really great to have you on. It's been a while that I really wanted to get you here to talk about, obviously, Bitcoin, but there is much more beyond that.
Absolutely. No, it's an exciting time to chat, so looking forward to the conversation.
Exactly. Exciting time to chat. So what is happening worldwide? I mean, it's like craziness, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably, certainly since I've been in the industry, this is the most volatile time, I feel like, from a macro sense. Obviously, COVID was volatile for Bitcoin as well, but that was sort of one thing. I feel like right now you've at least got two major things just disrupting everything at the same time, between, the sort of the war and then this AI, productivity disruption. And so, how Bitcoin starts to interplay with those things, it's a very interesting kind of process to watch.
100%. And I think last year, everybody was so excited about the ETFs, and then we saw so much happening from a corporate level with institution buying Bitcoin treasury companies. I think we thought the Bitcoin was really going to go over 200,000, but it didn't happen. And then we have kind of seen, I would say, really a bear market happening, right? And now with the war in Iran and all the political uncertainty, it seems like Bitcoin is trading in a way that, we didn't really expect it. Did you expect Bitcoin to trade like that?
There's always the hindsight is 2020 kind of thought process behind it. I can see why it has traded this way. What I will say is at some point we will see a quote unquote sort of eternal September of Bitcoin, which eternal September was, I think, September of 1994 or 97 or something, when internet usage kind of had gone through this cyclical up and down adoption cycle. And then eternal September happened and it was just up and to the right ever since, and there was no more sort of drop off of the usage of the internet. We will see that in Bitcoin. I think we're really close to it. And there were reasons to think that this would be the cycle that happened. But I agree with your framing. I think right now we're in a bear market. The question is how deep and how long of a bear market. It seems to be following Bitcoin's cyclical 4-year bull bear cycle. So from that sense, again, it's not entirely surprising we're here right now. What I am curious about is how deep we go and how long this lasts. And what you're seeing right now is the confluence of a few things. Number one, like you mentioned, we have institutional buyers. We kind of have a structural bid from the treasury companies and other institutions who are just allocating kind of blind to the price. And then at the same time, you've got some interesting macro, are they headwinds turning to tailwinds? We'll see. But, you have a new Fed chair in the US coming in. You have a potential deflationary shock of AI hitting, massive productivity disruptions, cost disruptions, business disruptions writ large. There's a lot of reason to think that a structural print from the Fed may be incoming to try and buoy the entire market. And if that happens, we've seen how Bitcoin responds. We saw how it responded from the COVID print. And I think that that's the kind of thing that could potentially significantly disrupt this 4-year bull bear cycle. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's kind of interesting to see that this pattern comes back, right? And I thought that with the institutions adopting Bitcoin, that would have been disrupted, but maybe the world wealth is not fully onboarded to Bitcoin yet. Right, so that might be why we are seeing this kind of trading pull back, because the money they are actually running the world is not the money of our age, right? Are the money of the baby boomers, and those people know gold, but they don't. They maybe understand Bitcoin and they like to get some, exposure, but they don't want to go all in.
Yeah, well, and what's been interesting on the gold trade is obviously it's not as transparent as Bitcoin. So you don't really know what's going on under the surface. You don't really know who's doing what. But I think, the most reasonable take I've seen about it has been there's sort of structural buying happening from central banks, particularly perhaps China. And that's what's led to kind of this massive surge in the gold price. However, a lot of the holders of gold are also Bitcoiners, right? They're also sympathetic to the entire Bitcoin narrative. And so one thing that I am curious to see is whether a structural rotation will happen at some point where all of these people who love Bitcoin have seen their gold value X over the past few months, and then the Bitcoin price cut in half. And at some point, they may want to take profits from their gold trade back into Bitcoin. And if that happens, all you're seeing now is if gold is sort of the ceiling on Bitcoin, if gold is where Bitcoin could potentially reach in terms of kind of replacing it, well, that ceiling just went from $10 trillion market cap to a $30 trillion market cap. And so that means that the ceiling of where Bitcoin can kind of go to reach that level has just 3x'd, which is actually a great scenario for Bitcoin, to be honest. The other thing that I would say on that too is central banks aren't yet buying Bitcoin. Some are, right? You saw Kazakhstan announce this past week that they're going to buy some Bitcoin, but it's still a on the outskirts kind of treasury strategy from a central bank. That's a 0 to 1 thing, though. It's not like once a central bank decides to become a Bitcoin, treasury strategy that all of a sudden they're going to go back, right? Bitcoin is an evolution of monetary, instruments. I can also see this potential where, maybe right now China's buying gold, but in 5 years or 10 years or 2 years or 2 months, I mean, who knows? They could see Bitcoin as a strategic treasury asset. And you could see the same sort of institutional bid on Bitcoin that you've seen on gold. So it's an interesting moment in time for sure for that trade. And yeah, I'm actually very bullish on it in the long term.
Yeah, let's see. Anyway, there is so much happening in the Bitcoin ecosystem that is just goes beyond really the investable assets. There is also development happening, experimentation. Bitcoin is money. You know that better. I mean, with the Bitcoin, with your company, BTC Inc., you get exposure to all these different type of companies that are building on Bitcoin. So we are I think the majority of people think about Bitcoin as is an asset to invest, but it's not just about that, right? There is a technology behind it. There are different uses that Bitcoin can actually things that Bitcoin can do. So there is much more behind it anyway.
Yeah, well, and I would also add that while the base layer of Bitcoin may be hard to change and hard to build around because, it's a very simple layer by design. Layer twos like Lightning, there are some, side chain or kind of, I don't know what we call them now, but the Bitcoin Season 2 sort of programmability into, Bitcoin. All of those things are iterating and creating new financial products pretty quickly. And so it'll be an interesting trend to watch. I think that a lot of the development in the crypto ecosystem writ large has happened on other chains. And there have been some successful things. As a Bitcoin maximalist myself, I've always thought that whatever is interesting in crypto will eventually happen on Bitcoin. And it's not to say that there can't be interesting things happening in crypto. It's just I hadn't seen them, and we had seen a lot, right? And all of it kind of tended to go to zero.
But I think I was gonna say that.
Yeah, exactly. But I think for instance, something that's been very interesting has been prediction markets, right? And that's something that happened on Polygon, which was an Ethereum layer 2. That's the L2 that launched Polymarket, right? Polymarket is completely taken off from a prediction market sense. You also have seen Kalshi kind of use Solana rails to some extent. So all I'm saying is these sort of prediction markets can be built on Lightning. They can be built on Bitcoin. And I expect that to happen because don't forget, Bitcoin is the greatest pool of liquidity in the world. In terms of liquidity, 24/7 trading, total market cap, it outpaces Solana and Ethereum by a ton, the traditional markets by about 2 days plus 18 hours a day in terms of liquidity. And so I just think that you're going to find money slowly gravitate towards those systems that are built on Bitcoin rails. And, now we actually have, I think, some interesting systems to build on Bitcoin rails. So I'm excited to watch it.
Now, talking about predictions, I remember the end of the year, I was watching privacy being one of really the big trends going into 2026. What are your predictions? What are you watching right now that you think is going to be game changing? That's on my radar.
Yeah, I have a lot of predictions. So maybe let's narrow this down. Predictions on sort of Bitcoin as a technology, predictions on the market. What direction do you want to go?
You can give me one prediction on the market and maybe prediction on Bitcoin development and one prediction on Bitcoin adoption.
Sure. So let's see. On the market. So I would say that my big prediction, and again, I may be completely wrong about this, but I think that by the back half of 2026, we will be in a structural bull market again, and we'll be testing all-time highs and potentially beyond. I recognize that is a this time is different type prediction. And so I'll probably be wrong. But I just think that there's so much structurally different about this market in terms of the players, what their investment thesis on Bitcoin is, and then macro tailwinds, coming to market in real time. I just have a feeling that this bear market is going to be short-lived and that there could be a really strong bounce from here. We'll see. From a technical standpoint, I've actually found that a lot of the privacy narratives that happened, especially towards the tail end of the bull market, people talking about Zcash or whatever. It feels a little contrived to me, to be honest. I think that at the end of the day, there are foundational issues with Zcash insofar as you can't audit the supply. If you have full layer 1 sort of privacy and zero knowledge proofs on the layer 1, then it's impossible to really know how much Zcash in this instance is actually circulating. This is like the flip side to the transparency of Bitcoin is it's fully auditable. And so, the question remains, and I think at some point there was a, inflationary bug discovered in Zcash, and, they've kind of created this whole technical upgrade to try and fix it. But at the end of the day, it's still not entirely clear whether that security flaw has been, exploited or not. And so, that sort of stuff just can't happen in Bitcoin because of the transparency layer. And so I think as time goes on, we're going to find that privacy means different things, and that Bitcoin affords a level of privacy that is acceptable as it continues to be used as a medium of exchange. Because ultimately, it's going to be so hard to probabilistically know who owns what coins when people aren't reusing addresses and when they're transacting on chain or through Lightning multiple times a day. And I think that's going to be enough privacy afforded to the average user and even to large scale users that they're going to be happy with it. And some of the other aspects of Bitcoin, like its auditability, like its transparency, like its, cap supply, its user base, its liquidity, all the things, right? Its decentralization, that all will outweigh kind of a small need for there to be a little bit more privacy behind what a transaction is. So that's my prediction on the technical side. I think that privacy narrative will kind of be a flash in the pan a little bit. It'll come back, it'll always come back, but I think there's good answers for it. On the adoption side.
And we can talk about corporate adoption as well. That's also what I mean.
Yeah. So, well, let me bifurcate this a little bit because corporate adoption is an interesting thing to watch. I was actually having an interesting conversation just the other day with Mark Yusko. And, one thing that's interesting is most institutional adopters right now aren't really adopting Bitcoin by a Bitcoiner's standard. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that a lot of them are just playing with trades. They're hedge funds, right? They're hedging. And so, for instance, one trade that has been very popular has been what's called the carry trade. They basically buy IBIT, an ETF spot, ETF product, and then they short the futures market and they capture a small spread. Maybe it's 3% or 5% or whatever it is. And they're neutral on Bitcoin, the asset. And by doing that, they're just basically using this little dislocation between the futures price of Bitcoin and the current price of Bitcoin. And when the futures market settles, they have the underlying Bitcoin and it just, they just collect the 3%, right? That's what a lot of people are doing. A lot of institutions are doing right now on Bitcoin. Well, I don't call that adoption. They're not long spot. They're not long Bitcoin. They're not using it for their own products. They may not even believe in it. They may just see sort of a trade and be executing on it. And so my prediction on adoption for institutions is that you'll start to see, especially coming out of this bear market, institutions who choose to be long spot, long Bitcoin, they will start to outperform and they will actually start to attract more capital and create an incentive in the market for there to be more institutional adoption. Right now, there's not, you're not outperforming your neighbor because you're long spot Bitcoin. But if Bitcoin goes 2x from here or 3x from here, and all of a sudden, now that it's been adopted like it has, now that every kind of institution has some exposure, which one am I going to allocate to? I'm going to allocate to the one that's long Bitcoin because that's a better trade. I can see that emerging in the next cycle, whenever that takes off, whether it's later this year, whether it's in a couple of years from now. I think that's what's going to happen.
It's very interesting also what strategy is doing with the digital credit. So kind of like I'm gonna ask you because obviously Nakamoto is a Bitcoin treasury company. Are we gonna see a Bitcoin treasury 2.0 and what actually that will look like? Will be on kind of development type of new financial product right strategy? Or will be different?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. What I would say is that what strategy offers is very new. It's very different. This digital credit product is very interesting. And I think that, it could completely change the way that people participate in public markets, frankly. And so, I don't want to at all undercount what that innovation looks like and how it might impact the broader market. That being said, I also don't think every single company in the public markets is going to have a 11% yielding, kind of debt instrument or creditor instrument. And so I think that maybe MicroStrategy will be unique in that way. Maybe there will be, a few strategy equivalents. We'll see. However, what I will say is that I expect the market to continue to reward companies who use Bitcoin as a treasury asset. And I think that you're going to see a spectrum of what that means. And we already have to some extent, right? We've seen Tesla, we've seen Block, Jack Dorsey's company also have Bitcoin in their treasury. And sometimes the market factors that in. Sometimes it's almost an afterthought. Sometimes it's treated as cash. It really just depends. But I think that you will find that there's going to be more aggressive companies. So if you put strategy at like the extreme level of aggressive on using Bitcoin as a treasury asset, and then you put no Bitcoin exposure at all at the other end, there's going to be so many companies spread out in between. It'll be a matter of what does their operation look like? What's their operating company? What are the needs? What are the cash flow needs? What are the risks? All these kinds of things will combine to create a lot of diversified strategies and portfolios. And I think that what we'll find is ultimately the market will reward all of it. And that sort of incentive will lead to hopefully someday every single public company having a Bitcoin treasury strategy. We'll see if that ends up happening. I think it should happen, but we're definitely in the early stages, the earliest possible stages right now.
What are you doing at Nakamoto? Because the acquisition of BTC Inc., obviously we know, is the largest, I would say, Bitcoin platform. You do events, you have a magazine, you do so many things, basically. You are leading kind of like the narrative in the space. But then there was UTXO, there was really the investment, right, in the space. And thanks to UTXO, many projects they managed actually to build. So what is the strategy or the Bitcoin strategy behind Nakamoto?
Yeah, well, and look, I think if you want a much deeper conversation about Nakamoto, you should have David Bailey on. And
you can give it from your perspective.
Yeah, and no one kind of articulates it better than him. But here's what I'll say is, what we bring to the table at BTC Inc. and UTXO for that matter is operating profits. Right? It's about a different way to accumulate Bitcoin where you're not only having to issue stock or issue a credit instrument and use that to buy Bitcoin, but you actually have profitable operating businesses whose profits can go into Bitcoin themselves, right? That's the idea. And that actually is much more attainable for most public companies as well. And so just because we're the first or one of the first really large scale, with a meaningful amount of revenue and profits in relation to the overall market cap type company, I don't think we're going to be the last. And I think that we can help pioneer the strategy here as it pertains to, having profits and using those profits to buy Bitcoin, frankly. So it's nothing too crazy from that standpoint. And again, I don't speak for the broader strategy of Nakamoto. I'm just looking at BTC Inc. But I think that that's the value that we bring. That's why Nakamoto, wanted to acquire us.
I want to come back to BTC Inc. and, all the stuff that you're doing, but let's talk a little bit about AI, because that's one of the topics that you're really passionate about. And obviously Bitcoin as being kind of defined as the currency of AI, right? But then we are seeing that there are so many AI agents right now. They are actually buying crypto and they're actually buying Bitcoin. So that kind of like generates some interesting question and concern as well at the same time. So first of all, let's maybe start. How do you see this intersection between AI and Bitcoin? And then let's talk about the agents.
Yeah, well, this actually answers your adoption question. If you remember, I had two forks. There's the institutional adoption, but there's another bucket of adoption that's very interesting, and that is AI from my standpoint. What do I mean by that? So I think what we're in the middle of right now is the creation of, let's call it 1 billion new software developers coming online overnight. And those are these AI agents, right? And their natural language is code, and they can act independently from humans, right? They can make their own decisions. They can make mistakes. They can make great decisions. They can do everything in between. And what you're watching is these almost pseudo digital life forms coming into being. Now, the problem with them is that they have their own limitations. Number one, they don't have a physical identity. They don't have an address. They don't have a social security number. They can't interact with the systems, right? at least not in a way that humans can, right? And so when you're looking at what they want to use, or if if they had sort of true motivations and an ideology underpinning them, they're not going to want to simply be participants in a system that they have no say in, right? So for instance, the US dollar, or if I'm an AI agent and I can't vote in the elections, I can't influence the outcomes, I can't influence policy, I have no say. Why would I use a currency that I have no say in? And so I think, yes, they may use credit cards early on. People may find cool ways, even stable coins. They may use stable coins for transactions. I think in the long term, and I don't think it's that long, I think, again, you have to remember these AI, they're thinking on the scale of, 1000x the speed of what humans thinks at, or more. I think you'll find very quickly that they're going to gravitate toward their own currency that they feel like they have an equal participation to humans in. And what does that mean? Well, like we said, stable coins are ultimately fiat. Fiat, they don't have a vote. Proof of stake systems are governed by, your pro rata ownership of the network. Well, these AI agents don't own any of the network. And so I would be surprised if you see them choose to, hold their wealth or value Ethereum or Solana or some of these other coins. Whereas proof of work is all about, in some ways the governance is not defined on purpose, but it's about the translation of energy into Bitcoin. And it's about really the battle of ideas in sort of the arena of public opinion and discourse. And it's a node that signals, and that node has economic impact, but it's also sentiment. And I think that what you'll find is that AIs, they can participate in that system pretty equally to humans. And there's a lot of predictability to it. They know what Bitcoin's going to be tomorrow. They know that humans aren't going to come in and change the supply on them, or do something that they can't control or can't interact with. And so I actually think that you'll find they will gravitate toward Bitcoin more and more as time goes on. And then the question becomes, what is their economic participation writ large, right? Like, right now I can give my agent a wallet and I can fund it with some Bitcoin. I can tell them, go to town, do whatever you want, right? Will they grow the Bitcoin in that wallet? Will they shrink the Bitcoin in that wallet? Will they spend it wisely? Will they create the case for me to send them more Bitcoin later? Is there going to be a flow from me to the agent for them to acquire more, to have more Bitcoin? Or will it flow in the opposite direction? Will they always sort of be a small, sort of bullet in everyone's gun to be able to go, do economic activity, but none of the value actually accrues to them? It all accrues back to the humans. I don't know. Like, we're all going to find that out together. It's going to be a very interesting system to watch. But, I think it's the most interesting thing happening in the world right now, frankly. And so, I'm watching it very closely.
And then obviously, everything that you said, it comes back to where the data are trained, right? And now there are a lot of discussion around sovereignty, right? And this is a big part of the podcast. So if we think about AI, we think about AI agent, we think about, Bitcoin as being a mean for them to actually get power, let's call it that way. Are you thinking about sovereign AI or the concept of sovereignty related to AI?
It's a very broad question, right? It's almost like, what does the world look like in the singularity, right? I tend to be sympathetic to Balaji Srinivasan's sort of network state theory, which is that we're going to see every single experimentation equivalent of what this all looks like. And so I think you'll see, a Chinese sort of communist system emerge with their own currency and their own AI. I think you'll see, a Christian fundamentalist AI, with its own, potential currency or fiat or system. And, repeat that sort of level of intersectionality over and over and over and over again. I think we're going to see all of these communities evolve where there's shared beliefs, shared values, shared ideologies, and that they will have their own shared AI model that kind of is trained on those beliefs and ideologies, and they will have their own potentially value transaction system, their own currency. However, those societies will all need to transact with each other. You won't be able to just be completely self-sustaining without talking to your neighbor or talking to the next country over. And Bitcoin will be kind of the credibly neutral settlement layer kind of the whole world in that model. And some of them will just use Bitcoin themselves, right? But that's my prediction of what all of that might look like.
It's kind of like, then it relates really to agents, because I get the point that it will be, we will see some countries having their own sovereign AI, but then you need to communicate with other countries. But then you have those agents. What those agents are going to be doing? Because are they going, if you give the money to them and say, go and spend them or go and invest them, are they going to invest in, US stock, UK stock, European stock? What are they going to do?
I mean, they're going to do whatever their model trains them to do, given the data that's out there, given,
Yes.
the profit maximizing path, right? And so, right now you have, let's say, 4 super models, we'll call them, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, and Grok. You've got handful of that too. You got a handful of open source models below that. Like, we are in, I think, the most centralized version of what the final outcome will be, because the sort of usefulness of these models has, in my opinion, eclipsed the sort of window. I don't know if there's a word for this. We'll call it the Overton window, but it's really the window where this is not a novelty anymore. This isn't an experiment. This isn't something that I do for fun, on the side. This is fundamentally how work and thought and research and innovation is going to happen from here on out. And so the pressure for you to have a model that works uniquely for you is going to increase. And the pressure on having a model with critical vulnerabilities, if OpenAI were to revoke my access tomorrow, what does that mean for me as a person? What does that mean for a company? That will become a fundamental risk in a way that, similarly in 2022, having a bank account and, protesting the government, if you're in Canada, was a fundamental risk. It was a critical risk. And so I think you'll find this dispersion and this dissemination of models that will sort of de-risk that entire situation. And yeah, that will just, again, it'll lead to these ideologies and these identities coalescing around their own system of thought and money and economic participation.
It's quite scary if we think about it. There are different layers, like you said. Anyway, let's talk about BTC Inc. because we have the BTC Vegas, the biggest Bitcoin conference coming up in a month or so. I will be there. I'm really excited to see, how big the event has grown. And it's quite impressive, because I remember the first time coming before COVID, and then I think I missed 1 year thereafter because of COVID. Anyway, the event got bigger and bigger and bigger, and more people. It wasn't just the Bitcoin community, it was like random people say, I want to know about Bitcoin, and they were coming there. And it's actually the largest event in the world, right? So it's definitely a big things that you are working towards. So maybe give us a little bit of some highlights of what we should expect for the people that are planning to come, and for the one that are still deciding if they want to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. What can you expect? Well, first of all, a lot of the themes that we've been talking about, I can speak broadly to, but we're going to have the foremost experts in the world on institutional adoption, regulation, AI integration, the technical improvements happening on Bitcoin. I mean, there's so much happening right now that sometimes if you just scroll Twitter and you doom scroll and you're not really in it, it's easy to miss. And what the reality is everything that's being built right now, especially in a bear market situation like this becomes the foundation for how Bitcoin grows over the next 3-4 years. And so if you kind of miss out on what's going on right now, you're going to be lost as all of these improvements, all of these technical capabilities, all of these adoption trends compound, week over week, month over month, year over year. And so, it's very important to not miss the signal. And especially in events like this, the signal is really high. To your point about we've continued to grow. It's been, frankly, it's been like disruptive and chaotic for us to try and grow with our audience. It's not easy. It's not easy to kind of have the takeoff that this conference has seen. But I think that points to a couple things. Like, number one, there's a lot of different Bitcoiners as we sort of see them, adopters. Everyone kind of comes to Bitcoin for their own reason, their own story, their own set of values that brought them there. And our goal is to kind of try and help every single person go one step further on their Bitcoin journey at our conference, right? And that means that we have to go broad with a lot of the content. We have to cover all sorts of interesting topics, from open source to mining to, regulation and politics, whatever it is, right? We have to cover it all so that we can be the yearly event for Bitcoin. And everyone can truly come and find something valuable there. So that means that it's been difficult to keep up with everything that's happening. I mean, it's truly been a crazy couple of years. But it also means that if you haven't been paying attention, if you haven't been checking in, if you're just buying and hodling and waiting for, what's ever going to happen next, this year's actually an incredible opportunity to come in and in 1 3-day period, accumulate more knowledge and understanding about Bitcoin than you have in the past 3 years, 10 years, however long. And so I highly encourage everyone to come. I think this year is going to be uniquely insightful and interesting. We have, we're still 7 weeks out. We've got a lot of stuff we have not yet announced that I think people are going to be very excited about. So stay tuned on all of that. But what I would say is if you're waiting on us to announce the thing that's going to get you there, I'd go ahead and get your ticket now. The ticket prices continue to increase. Yeah. Hotels are selling out. So definitely don't wait. Make sure you get your flight. But we'd love to see you there, and it's going to be a phenomenal event. I think this will be one of those events where either you were there or you weren't.
Yeah. You gain so much knowledge when you are really there at the event with other people. You are watching, you are seeing. I think we are kind of, after COVID, we have come back to the in-person value. And definitely the event for the Bitcoin community is really important. And I do agree with you. You kind of need to be there to understand the vibes and then the conversation. And that's where it's going to set you up to better understand also where things are going. Now, obviously, running a media company is quite difficult. You said that obviously you have got the biggest event, you are making always the best with that. But then what about content? What about distribution? What about different ways to reach out to people to increase adoption, which is what, we are all trying to do. And I remember 10 years ago, podcasting was strange. I remember first time I was on Zoom and it was 2017 and I was probably one of, was early at that time. Now everybody does podcast, you have got everything, right? People go live on different kind of social media. Give us some insights from your side, as BTC Inc. is planning to kind of evolve, or exactly what you're doing, or where are you investing more energy and resources to increase adoption?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a few trends that I would pull on there. Number one, and not that everything has to go back to AI, but what I will say is AI right now is massively disrupting the media landscape. And the simplest way to understand that is the amount of Googling people do, the amount of times that someone goes to, their Safari or, Chrome or whatever, and types in the question and then clicks on a link and reads an article about it and gets served an ad in that article. The fundamental way that digital media has existed for the past, call it 15 years, that is falling off a cliff. And what is happening, or what's replacing that, number one, Google Gemini is now giving direct answers in the search bar, right? So when you go to Google and you ask a question, now Gemini will just answer it. And then number two is people are just opting to go to their chat interface first, right? They want to just ask the question in the way they want to ask it and get the answer that they know they can kind of rely on without them having to go find the answer themselves. And so what does that mean? Well, first and foremost, it means that the SEO, display ad era of media is over, at least for right now, until someone finds a way to reinvent that in an AI native way, which, they got to be smarter than me to figure that out. That era is over. And so what that leaves is what I would consider to be, and I use this term with our team all the time, it's authentic human experiences. That's what people want, right? Now that your AI can give you all the information, it can do all the things at your fingertips, what it can't do is it can't replace a face-to-face interaction, a human-to-human connection, the sort of spontaneity, the emotional connection, all of the things that we live for, frankly, life, beauty, all of the things, right, that we actually care about as human beings. They can't replace that. And so where I believe media needs to go, and where I think, for instance, podcasters have already been for a little while, is more towards the more human communication of information and thoughts and values and ideas, etc. And so, that requires conversation like this.
Yeah.
Right? It requires a in-person element many times, being able to reach out and touch your neighbor and grab a drink and, shoot the shit. All of that. It sounds flippant. It sounds, kind of simple and unimportant, but it is everything in a world where the production of information has gone to zero. And so, I think that from some instances, we're actually really well positioned for this, because of our event and because, our YouTube is so big and our video media production is scaling really well. But at the same time, it means that we need to double down on the quality and the sort of emotional and identity connection that we have in our content. Yeah. Because that's what will keep people coming back. That's what will keep people feeling connected to the brand. And that's what will ultimately keep us growing as a media company in today's age. I know that's like a nebulous answer, but that's how we're thinking about it.
It was really good because basically, and I was just thinking, right? So before, media used to bring the expert's point of view, right? Now the expert is your ChatGPT, is your AI. You are not going to find this expert online. They say something, you just ask ChatGPT. And then also influencers, that kind of like personality, I think has kind of gone down. But what didn't, that you explained very well, is the value of the community and everything that comes with that. So being able to nurture this community where that content, experience, and things that are not expected by AI, right? That's really where the value comes. And I guess that we kind of need to be inventive sometime, original, funny, weird, I mean, in a good way, but things that people would say, oh God, what's what's coming up. So
you've got to be human.
Exactly. And also failing, right? Making mistake, doing something that, okay, it's not expected anyway. So I'm really expecting the unexpected at Bitcoin Vegas.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun time. And, to underline the point before, it will be a authentic human experience. And so, for the people who are feeling craved of that, who are feeling, or I guess starved of that, who are feeling like, they're going through this mini bear market on their own, who feel like, the world's changing around them. They don't really understand what's going on. They're looking for explanations. Come to the conference. Come meet your community. Come hang out, grab a beer. Let's talk about it. Let's jam on it. Maybe, there's tons of companies hiring right now. Go meet a company that is looking for your exact skill set. Go start a company. It's never been cheaper to start a company right now. Go find your co-founder here in the Bitcoin conference and build the financial tools for the next century. And there's never been a better time to do it. So I highly encourage everyone to come out.
Brandon, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was great talking to you.
Steffi, thank you so much.